Welcome, and thanks for joining me today as we explore climate security and national security in Florida. I'm Jessica Alcott-Ulmo, Director of Climate Security Programs at the American Security Project. We're excited to be back again this year at Florida Climate Week. Today I'm going to talk through a broad overview of climate security and national security considerations specific to the state of Florida. While I won't be able to talk extensively about all of the climate security challenges we're facing, I hope you'll be able to walk away with an appreciation for the climate security and national security nexus, Florida's role in national security, and some important resilience measures already underway. While national security has a range of diverse components, today's presentation will focus mostly on military installations and how Florida's resilience efforts directly impact the resilience of our military. To set the stage, I'd like to first introduce the American Security Project and tell you a little bit more about our work. ASP is a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank created by a bipartisan group of senators, including then Senators John Kerry, Chuck Hagel, Gary Hart, and Warren Redmond, to address the need for more robust dialogue about the changing nature of national security. Our board of directors and Consensus for American Security members are a coalition of former senior government officials, retired flag officers, and business leaders dedicated to exploring a broad range of security issues through events, traditional and new media, meetings, and research publications. Although ASB executes research in several different policy issues, climate security has been one of our biggest areas of focus. Since 2014, our flagship program, the National Climate Security Tour, has conducted more than 50 events in 23 states and Washington, D.C. These events typically consist of a public panel discussion with our experts, local leaders, and community stakeholders to explore climate security challenges in different locations. In Florida, we've conducted more than 10 events with several universities, including the University of West Florida, Florida International University, Florida Southern College, and Full Sail University to explore different ways of how climate is impacting military installations and defense communities, while also highlighting the adaptation and mitigation process underway. In addition, ASB hosts the Climate Security in Focus blog series, which explores key elements of climate security to facilitate a better understanding of climate policy challenges. ASB also has a dedicated line of programming for maritime security and illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, electrification and electric vehicles, as well as Arctic security. Much of this work is relevant to what is happening in Florida, but won't be able to be covered today. If you'd like to know more, please visit our website at www.americansecurityproject.org or check out our presentation from last year's Florida Climate Week for more about Florida's role in national security. At the core of ASB's climate work is the belief that climate change is directly impacting our national security. It is already exacerbating existing threats, risks, and hazards while simultaneously creating new ones. It's impacting infrastructure, hurting our economy, and undermining the security and well-being of our fellow Americans. From energy and food security to our military readiness and economic competitiveness, no industry or individual is unaffected by climate change. At a recent event at West Point, Deputy Defense Secretary Kathleen Hicks put it succinctly, "You can't train for combined operations with allies and partners if the training facilities are flooded. You can't run an installation without water because you're in a drought, and you can't adequately prepare for future threats if you're occupied with urgent crises." Responding to the climate crisis is already impacting manpower and readiness. For example, the number of personnel days the National Guard spent on firefighting increased from 14,000 in fiscal year 2016 to 176,000 days in fiscal year 2021. That's more than a 12-fold increase in 5 years, which has required a redirection of time, attention, and resources. Closer to home here in Florida, in 2021, Pensacola Naval Air Station suffered $450 million in damage from Hurricane Sally and damage to more than 600 facilities on the installation. There are many ways that climate impacts our national security, but for today's discussion, I'm going to focus mostly on the Department of Defense and military installations. Florida is home to 3 combatant commands and 20 different installations across the state, and many have already experienced climate-related extreme weather events that impact readiness and resilience. To provide a baseline understanding of where the Department of Defense and the military are, let's look at some of the existing climate policies and guidance. This is a brief snapshot of some of the climate-specific strategies and plans that the DOD enterprise has developed. As you can see, some of these have been around for a decade or more, which demonstrates that this is no passing fad. In fact, climate has been conceptualized as a threat multiplier by national security experts and the defense enterprise as a whole since the early 2000s. A landmark report from the Center for Naval Analysis in 2007 launched climate change into the national security conversation, and a few years later, policymakers solidified climate change as a national security threat in the 2010 and 2014 Quadrennial Defense Reviews, which were the precursors to the National Defense Strategy. Over the past 5 years, DoD and each of the service branches have issued additional climate-related strategies and plans designed to institutionalize climate as a strategic, operational, and tactical concern. DoD now includes security implications of climate change in all risk analysis, strategy development, and planning. Climate change is already exacerbating many of the challenges that the Department of Defense and the national security enterprise are dealing with. From infectious disease to terrorism, and to extreme weather events and a dependence on fossil fuels, climate change is becoming a key planning and operational factor. Similarly, resilience to these risks and the continued ability to provide the military forces needed to ensure our national security is a primary objective. And now a bit more about resilience. The mission of the Department of Defense is to provide the military forces needed to deter war and ensure the national security. As such, resilience is a key component in all of the Department of Defense climate plans, as well as the National Security Strategy and National Defense Strategy. There are many nuances to how organizations define resilience, but for DoD, it's the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to changing conditions and withstand, respond to, and recover rapidly from disruptions. Energy resilience in particular is a critical need for DoD and installations, as they are responsible for ensuring that each component is ready to execute its missions. Almost all installations depend on commercial utilities for electrical power and are impacted by the same outages that individuals in the greater community deal with. Public-private partnerships and defense community resilience play an important role. More on that in a minute. Broadly speaking, the Department of Defense is responding to climate change in two primary ways: adaptation to enhance resilience and mitigation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Both of these lines of effort lead to increased resilience and have a particularly important role in Florida. DoD is collecting and disseminating data, metrics, and tools to better inform decision makers about climate adaptation needs. For example, CERTIP ESTCP launched the DoD Regional Sea Level Tool for more than 1,700 DoD sites worldwide. This tool enables planners and managers to understand and assess site-specific scenarios of sea level rise, which can be adjusted for future sea level change and storm surge. Meanwhile, the DoD Climate Assessment Tool provides a collection of scientific climate data to support research, analysis, and decision-making about exposure to historic extreme weather and reasonably foreseeable climate effects. It enables military departments and installation personnel to deliver consistent exposure assessments and identify regions or installations for additional climate-related studies. And the DISD tool coordinates, standardizes, and leverages geospatial information and analytics across DoD's mission areas to better manage installations and infrastructure. DoD also coordinates a water resilience working group. Policy leads from each of the service branches and technical experts have convened to respond to congressional requests, develop the DoD Water Management and Security Assessment methodology, and examine water resilience metrics and data collection methods. The other major way DoD is responding to climate change is by reducing its greenhouse gas emissions. Earlier this year, DoD released its first ever plan to reduce GHG emissions, which outlines pathways to reduce energy demand and increase energy efficiency. DoD is the nation's biggest energy consumer. The DoD is deeply invested in enhancing energy resilience as a cost-saving measure and as an operational and readiness necessity. DoD's emissions have trended downward since tracking and reporting began in 2010. But continuing to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions remains a core line of effort and is directly tied to enhancing resilience. For our purposes, we can compartmentalize DoD's greenhouse gas emissions into installation energy and operational energy. Operational energy is the energy required to transport, train, and sustain personnel and weapons for military operations. DOD is reducing these emissions by reducing demand through efficiency and developing new capabilities, adopting alternative energy sources like sustainable aviation fuels, and pursuing alternative power generation. Installation energy is the energy required to operate military installations and bases, including heating, cooling, and power sources. DOD is reducing these emissions by reducing energy demand, expanding on-site clean energy generation and storage, and rapidly scaling purchases from clean energy solutions and innovations. I'll spend the remainder of our time today talking about installations and installation energy. Here's where Florida plays a particularly important role. Florida plays a critical role in the climate security conversation in many different ways, but today I'm continuing to focus on installations. Florida is home to 3 combatant commands: U.S. Central Command, U.S. Special Operations Command, and U.S. Southern Command, as well as more than 20 bases, which represent every branch of the military and the U.S. Coast Guard. CENTCOM is responsible for U.S. security interests in the Middle East, North Africa, and Southwest and Central Asia. Special Operations Command is responsible for disrupting, defeating, and destroying terrorist networks worldwide. And SOUTHCOM is responsible for providing contingency planning, operations, and security cooperation in Central and South America, as well as the Caribbean. The resilience of these installations have a truly global impact. Florida is also home to 2 of the Navy's 4 deepwater airports with adjacent airfields and one of 3 Navy Fleet Readiness Centers. It is also home to the Marine Corps' only maritime pre-positioning force facility. However, 8 of Florida's installations have been ranked most at risk of impacts from climate change. These threats include rising sea levels, recurrent flooding, extreme weather events, extreme heat, drought, and wildfires. Flooding and outdated wastewater infrastructure have also increased the frequency and intensity of harmful algal blooms in Florida water sources, which poses a risk that can create an unsafe environment for maritime patrol training and operations. There are several other Florida military bases not on this list, whose resilience is just as important to our military readiness. Naval Air Station Jacksonville is the 3rd largest naval facility in the country, and Naval Station Mayport has the 3rd largest naval fleet concentration in the country. Similarly, Air Station Clearwater in Tampa Bay is one of the U.S. Coast Guard's largest and busiest air stations, with an operating area that includes the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean Basin, and the Bahamas. Climate impacts there can impact drug trafficking operations, smuggling and interdiction operations, as well as search and rescue operations in and around the Florida coast. These installations and the surrounding community's resilience have a direct impact on our military's readiness to execute critical missions. As I mentioned earlier, energy resilience of both the installations themselves and the commercial utility companies that provide power to the installations are important for readiness and the ability to actually execute the mission. But there is also an economic factor. Military installations contribute approximately $12 billion annually to local economies, so investments in installation resilience have a much bigger impact than just on the installation themselves. Fortunately, there are several DoD programs already in the works designed to enhance resilience. One of the major programs is the Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program, or Reppi. Reppi's mission is to make military installations more resilient to climate change and land use conversion. By partnering with both public and private organizations, Reppi has protected nearly 1.2 million acres of land across the U.S., which preserves key operational assets, infrastructure, and capabilities, and historically has enjoyed bipartisan support at both the federal and state levels. A key component of Reppi is encroachment management partnerships, which increase resilience to climate change and land use conversion. These projects contribute to the longevity of working farms, forests, and ranch lands, increased recreational opportunities, and protection against military relocations. Through the end of fiscal year 22, DoD and its partners have spent nearly $228 million on Reppi projects at 11 installations in Florida, including several of the installations classified most at risk from climate change. There are also several other federally funded programs operating to enhance resilience for Florida's installations. The Defense Community Infrastructure Pilot Program is designed to address deficiencies not just at military installations, but also in community infrastructure that supports the installation in order to enhance value, increase resilience, and improve military family quality of life. For example, Last year, the Eglin Air Force Base community was awarded $3.4 million in funding for construction of a new fire station to enable wildland firefighting and faster deployment of emergency medical services. Similarly, Naval Station Mayport was awarded funding for construction of a new water main to improve capacity and pressure for consumers directly adjacent to the installation, enable future connection to the installation, and provide redundancy. In 2023, 3 Florida installations were invited to apply for grant funds: Marine Corps Support Facility Blount Island in Jacksonville, Naval Air Station Pensacola, and Naval Air Station Whiting Field. Projects at these installations range from construction of a new fire station to upgrade facilities, reduce flooding threats and emergency response times at airport parking aprons, upgrades and construction to new taxiways, and other opportunities. Final decisions will be announced near the end of September. The Sentinel Landscape Partnership, meanwhile, is a coalition of federal agencies, state and local governments, and non-governmental organizations that work with private landowners to advance sustainable land management practices around military installations and ranges. DOD, the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Interior partner to strengthen military readiness, conserve natural resources, bolster agricultural and forestry economies, and increase climate change resilience. Florida is home to 2 of the 10 partnerships. The Avon Park Air Force Range Sentinel Landscape in South Central Florida is anchored by the Air Force's largest primary air-to-ground training range east of the Mississippi River, which is used by every branch of the armed forces. It is also home to portions of the Everglades Headwaters National Wildlife Refuge and Conservation Area and covers almost 1.7 million acres of land. The Northwest Florida Sentinel Landscape encompasses agricultural lands, forests, and endangered species habitats in all 9 Northwest Florida military installations. These Sentinel Landscape programs help facilitate military mission assurance, restore and increase resiliency and sustainability of habitat and water resources, retain working agricultural and forest lands, mitigate coastal risks, and increase the climate resilience of military installations. Several Florida regions have also been awarded military installation resilience reviews. These community-led activities are funded by the Department of Defense Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation and support a variety of planning, assessment, and implementation actions to facilitate, protect, and enhance the sustainability of military installations. Examples of projects include reviews of natural and man-made threats and vulnerabilities, targeted studies or plans concerning transportation or land use and encroachment, as well as examining utility services, housing, and stormwater or sewer management. In 2021, the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council was awarded funding to conduct a resilience study which analyzed energy, water, and wastewater vulnerabilities, transportation limitation, and critical infrastructure challenges in Tampa Bay and around MacDill Air Force Base. Similarly, in 2022, South Florida was awarded funding for a similar project, which adopts a regional approach and incorporates risk factors for 5 installations. And in 2023, the Emerald Coast Regional Council was awarded funding for similar activities. As you can see, these activities have widespread impacts on the resilience of mission-critical installations, as well as the surrounding communities. There's also a lot of activity happening at the state level. Earlier this year, Governor DeSantis announced more than $6.1 million in funding for military communities through the Defense Infrastructure Grant Program, Defense Reinvestment Grant Program, and the Florida Defense Support Task Force Grant Program. Through a collaborative effort with the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity and Enterprise Florida, these programs are providing grants to military communities to support infrastructure projects, economic diversification, and community relations at several of the most at-risk locations. Meanwhile, the Resilient Florida program, through the Office of Resilience and Coastal Protection, was created to help coastal and inland communities plan for the impacts of climate change, including flooding and sea level rise. Resilient Florida grants fund a range of activities for research and programs that protect waterways, coastlines, and shores. There are also numerous regional collaboratives and coalitions that bring together universities, military installations, public and private entities to help enhance resilience, not just at the installations themselves, but in the entire community. There are also several city and county plans that are helping facilitate installation resilience. The list you see here is not comprehensive, but rather a snapshot of some of the existing city and county climate action and/or resilience plans that are directly supporting the well-being and resilience of our soldiers, sailors, and airmen their families, and their collective ability to execute their missions. There are also several city plans that are making important progress for defense communities. Tampa has just released its Climate Action and Equity Plan, which builds on the mayor's Transforming Tampa's Tomorrow initiative and the Resilient Tampa Roadmap. It has outlined goals and actions designed to reduce the city's emissions and energy use while simultaneously preparing the city to manage climate impacts. Its goals for transitioning municipal operations to 100% clean energy, supporting a transition away from fossil fuels in the local economy, planning for future stormwater, reducing vehicle usage, and facilitating improvements in waste management will all have a direct impact on McDill's operational and installation resilience. Like other parts of the Sunshine State, managing groundwater, wastewater, and stormwater are central to the safety and resilience in the Tampa Bay area. Saltwater intrusion is already causing challenges for the drinking water supply. Contaminated water leaking from solid waste and the wastewater pumping facilities are particularly complex challenges. Management of wastewater effluent has been an acute problem at McDill. Existing systems simply do not have the capacity to adequately address climate change-fueled increases in severe weather and extreme rainfall. Furthermore, protecting water treatment facilities from flooding is an essential element to enhancing the city's overall resilience. As I begin to wrap up, I would be remiss if I did not highlight the incredible forward-leaning resilience planning happening at Tyndall Air Force Base. Located 12 miles east of Panama City, Florida, Tyndall Air Force Base suffered catastrophic damages from Hurricane Michael in 2018. Hurricane Michael was one of the strongest recorded hurricanes ever to hit the U.S. and damaged or destroyed every building on the base. To date, the Category 5 storm has caused more than $5 billion in damages and has had significant impact on the personnel, infrastructure, and readiness, particularly for the F-22 fighting fleet, which is a critical component of the U.S. Global Strike Force. However, as Tyndall has embarked on its rebuild, it has seized the opportunity to lean forward by creating the installation of the future. The redesign and development of the base promotes sustainable, resilient, and smart technological approaches that exceed baseline DOD criteria for the planning, design, construction, sustainment, and restoration for projects. Instead of using the baseline criteria, Tyndall has adopted higher Miami-Dade County standards for the exterior of the buildings, as well as for wind speed requirements, which are now at the maximum Florida building code for high-velocity hurricanes, 165 miles per hour. Similarly, other high-velocity hurricane zone requirements were adopted, such as roof framing to foundation connections and flood elevation design, which is a combination of Federal Emergency Management base flooding levels and the highest DOD regional sea level rise scenarios for year 2100. These enhancements will reduce energy demand and create a more resilient installation, ready to withstand the most severe of weather. Tyndall Air Force Base is also using the rebuild opportunity to build the flight line of the future, a smarter, high-tech innovation for integrating the flight line while maintaining security, being resilient, and increasing agility. Nature-based solutions are also being adopted in the rebuild through reforestation and the Engineering with Nature initiative. Tyndall lost nearly 12,000 acres of upland pine forest post-Hurricane Michael, and reforestation efforts have been underway since December of 2020. As of April of 2021, over 2 million longleaf pine trees were planted on approximately 3,700 acres. By the end of 2023, the goal is to have reforested 5,300 more acres. These longleaf pine trees, unlike slash and other pine trees, can withstand higher winds and are less susceptible to major insect infestations and diseases. In turn, these pine trees provide a more resilient landscape for base operations. The rebuild is expected to last 5 to 7 years, but Tyndall has the potential to be a proof of concept for resilience best practices for installations. As we wrap up today, I hope I can leave you with 3 key takeaways. First, conceptualizing climate as a national security issue is not new. National security experts and defense professionals have been working for more than 20 years to build our resilience. Second, Florida is home to several critical military installations that perform mission-essential functions upon which our national security relies. Resilience at these installations and in the surrounding defense communities is imperative. And finally, there are many ongoing activities at the regional, state, and federal level designed to enhance installation and community resilience. If you live in a defense community and want to know more about how to get involved, please contact us or your local regional council. Thanks for joining me today.